Hello everyone, welcome to 2D Animation, and today we're going to be covering the user interface of Adobe Animate CC, formerly known as Adobe Flash Professional CC. Now, once you open up the software, go ahead and just click on Action Script 3.0. This is going to be our primary document that we're going to be creating content with. Now here, it opens up to the main stage. This big white box is our main stage. This is where all the content that we create will be published from. Everything outside of it will not be published. And this darker area here is known as your backstage, or also known as your pasteboard. So your files are here. You can create new files, and you can open new files. File new. And click OK. And you'll see that I can now have a few tabs of different project files that I can work with and go back and forth between. Other things within the File Command tab, we have our new, open, save, save as. These are pretty standard to Adobe software, or really any software for that matter, Microsoft Office, anything you can really think of. So you always generally have your file, your edit, and then these might be different, but your file, edit, help, probably window too are all pretty much standard. Our view is sort of our magnification. We can turn on rulers, insert. We're going to get into what this tab does when we touch base in the timeline. So you'll see right here we have our timeline, and we'll get into a lot of detail. We're going to be working with our timeline a lot throughout these projects here. And we've got our modify. This modifies content on the stage, transform, align, things like that. Our text, font, spacing, centering it, etc. Commands we're not going to really use too much. Control, we will be playing back our animations, obviously. We'll rewind them, we'll step forward in frames and backwards in frames. So we'll be using a lot of these control buttons, but located right down here. We have our debug. We're not going to really need to debug anything. We're not going to be doing too much with ActionScript, if any at all. Our window, this gives us a whole bunch of different windows that we have access to for Adobe Animate. And then we have our help menu. So our help menu is for anything that we kind of get stuck on or want to look up a keyboard shortcut or whatever it might be. You can probably find it in the help menu. Other than that, we have our properties tab. The properties tab will give us a whole different amount of settings that we can adjust pending what we have selected. So right now we have the stage selected. If I were to go ahead and select something like the oval tool, you'll notice that this properties tab changes. So for each tool it has its own properties. Going back into our main stage, in the properties of the main stage, we have our frames per second. Now that's what this FPS stands for. We're going to stick at 24 frames per second. You may be asking yourself, 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second seems pretty standard for like video games or Blu-ray or whatever it might be. And for this course, I want you to stay with 24 frames per second. And the reason being is once you start adding more frames per second, let's say you go to 30 frames per second, you've just added 6 more frames per second to work with. Now, if you were to go to something like, let's say, most video games run at is 60 frames per second, you've almost added 3 times the amount of work per second. And that's really, really not an efficient way of working. So stick with 24 frames per second. It's your standard frame rate for when you're sitting in the movie theater and you have the movie projector playing the film for you at the theater. They play at 24 frames per second. So it's a pretty smooth frame rate. Now, as for the size, this is approximately a 4:3 aspect ratio. And we're going to be working in a 16:9 aspect ratio. And what that is the 16:9 aspect ratio is for widescreen format. So your televisions nowadays, tablets, monitors, when you flip your phone sideways, that's a 16:9 aspect ratio. So We're going to change our size. This is your width and your height, and we're going to switch this to 1280 by 720, and this is going to be our standard size that we work with. Now, in this size, we have 1280 by 720 px, that stands for pixels. Now, Adobe Animate is a vector-based program, so all the lines and art that we create in this software is all based off of more or less mathematical equations that creates these smooth curves for us, or really sharp right angles and things like that. So it's a really great software that allows us to scale things no matter what we create them at. We'll be able to scale them at the same resolution to an enormous size if we needed. And the nice thing about that is that you can do that in Animate or, let's say, Illustrator. Whereas if you were to try to scale something that you created in Photoshop, which is a pixel-based art software, you are not going to get the same results. It's going to start to become very blurry, pixelated, if you've ever heard that term, and it doesn't hold that same resolution as Adobe Animate or Illustrator would. So going back over here, we have our toolbar, and our toolbar has 3, 4, 5 different sections. So you'll notice they're barred off by these little sections here. So I call these my selection tools. I call this my content creation tools inside these brackets. I call these my content modifiers, my navigation tools, color tools, and the extra properties tab. So if yours doesn't look like this, go ahead and on this little line right here that separates the properties and the tools, just drag it out, in or out, and make sure you just have about the dual column setup. This way you'll get all these extra settings down here. So in my pencil, you'll see I have different settings down here, as well as my brush. So each one of these tools has an entirely different set of properties that you can adjust, as well in the properties tab is too. So we have our pencil tool, it'll change here, oval tool. All these tools will have different settings. Now, going back into here, we have our library, and this is where we're going to create our symbols or import images or what have you, and we'll create a library of content that we can create or that we can drag and drop into our stage. So then we also have our timeline located down here. Our timeline is where we have our frames per second, which controls the speed of the timeline. This is where we're going to be doing all of our animations. We can add layers down here in our timeline, folders, and we can also delete layers or folders. And that's pretty much it for the generic overview of the user interface. We're going to get into more detail into the tools next, and then also the timeline following that. Thanks for watching.